All right, y'all. Oof. So I already tried recording this episode once and was finding myself feeling very overwhelmed. So I'm going to try this again. And I'm just going to go a little bit slower today because the episode I'm wanting to share with y'all, as you can tell from the title, is about something I'm currently very much in the middle of, talking about depression. And yesterday, I was trying to figure out what I was going to record for this next week's episode. It's actually Sunday morning at the moment. And I'd reached out to Quinn because we had discussed doing an episode together. And after a couple of hours of the two of us just talking about all sorts of different things, I was so grateful to her because she said, I'm just not really feeling this. And I was like, oh my God, me too. It's like we were trying to force something that wasn't there. And so I left that conversation thinking, okay, I may not be recording an episode this week. I know I've been going through a lot of what I'm going to explain on this episode. Just my oldest and I are going through some really tough interactions at the moment. Our connection's really strained. And the impact that that's been having on me has been really, really tough this week. And so I was just giving myself some space. Maybe it's not a week to be recording an episode as much as I want to be putting something out every week for all of you. I've got to be there for myself first. And then yesterday went down and it was very dynamic, really, really difficult, very, very painful emotionally for me, CPTSD wise. And I woke up this morning after having gone through that and I was like, oh, there's the episode. There's what I want to talk about today, which is hopefully sharing some of my own experiences with this amazing knowledge I learned yesterday. While I was in the thick of it, I happened to pick up the Complex PTSD book by Pete Walker and read a chapter I had not read before, where he talks about this abandonment depression cycle. And I cannot tell y'all how much it helped to put words to what I've been experiencing this week, words even above and beyond, right? Like I know I have CPTSD. I understand I get emotional flashbacks, but this really illuminated more fully for me this kind of complex and very circular cycle that I can get into that just spirals and spirals. When I'm in an emotional flashback, often I can use the tools he's given to manage it. But when I get into this abandonment depression cycle, it's a lot more severe than that. And why I want to talk about it is because I highly suspect that most of you will be able to relate. And in most of you being able to relate, that's what I want most of all to come through this episode, is this understanding that this is what it is, and to give you tools, right, to help you when working through, to first of all understand what you're experiencing potentially, and then to be able to work through it. Because I think depression in general is really misunderstood in our society. And this piece is also really important to understand because I think for me, definitely being married in that environment, my ex-husband and I, the way we were in our marriage, that was not a conducive environment to helping me heal this and understand and be able to manage my CPTSD. But also now 5 years post-divorce, it still being here, that can be really disorienting, right? If you think, oh, I'm going to get divorced and everything's going to be perfect. I always want to present as clear of a picture as possible for y'all going forward on what it actually looks like to live, to exist, and ultimately to thrive, right? Even though this week's been really hard, I can see how the work I'm doing is ultimately leading me more and more to a space of thriving. But it's not easy more and more, the more I live life, I'm like, I don't think there's an easy way here. I don't think that's really what it's about. But I think in normalizing, hopefully, the hard, in painting as much as I, can. Obviously, there's parts of my life that are personal and private to me that I don't share here on the podcast, although I am very open about a lot of things. But this is one of the areas that I think it's important to share, because you do get to hear a lot from me on the podcast when I am in my confident, strong, fiery as fuck side. And I just want to illuminate that there is also this side to me that is also just as much a part of me. And in doing that, hopefully normalize for a lot of you this experience that you may be able to relate to. So later on in the episode, I am going to dive deeper into the experience of what's going on between me and my son, because I think it's just so beautiful. This example, I think it's going to shed a lot of light for many of you on why these interactions affect perhaps you in probably similar ways that they do to me, which is these moments where we feel deeply rejected or criticized by someone that we love. And the pain that comes up from that can be so much bigger than the situation that's just in front of you. And I don't think I'm alone in this. That's why I'm like, oh my God, I want to speak about this. I want to hopefully illuminate what's happening for a lot of you. Because I know a lot of the unhelpful messaging that I picked up was feeling really crazy deep down inside, that I have these super strong emotional reactions that are pretty overwhelming for things that at times can seem really small. And now that I understand the deeper underlying parts of that, it's like, oh, of course. This is what's actually going on. So I also wanted to recommend, for those of you that have the Pete Walker book, that this is going to be in chapter 12. That chapter yesterday, I just, the universe just knows what it's doing. It just led me straight to it through a kind of synchronistic little reorganizing of some books on my shelf and it not fitting. And I just happened to pull it down and open it up. So chapter 12 is called The Map: Managing the Abandonment Depression. And I want to dive in with you guys now to explaining what that is, right? So Pete Walker defines the abandonment depression as this deep pain that we carry with us from childhood, when we experienced in our childhood rejection, neglect, or emotional abandonment. And it is the heart and foundation of complex PTSD. And damn, y'all. If somebody had come to me the other day prior to all of this and been like, do you think you have abandonment depression? I would be like, that sounds a little bit extreme. Like, I don't know. I don't think abandonment depression. Like, I don't think I have that. But holy fuck, y'all. Do I have this? This is really the underlying core. If I had to describe it, it's this deep, complex pain around, as a child, just feeling really utterly alone and not being able to acknowledge that, having really no one safe to express that to. And so in it not being safe to express it, I ended up hiding it even from myself. And when it shows up, I talked previously on the podcast about these emotional flashbacks that Pete Walker talks about, right? And they're that moment where something happens, there's a trigger, okay, that flashes you back to feeling that hopeless, helpless, overwhelmed state of being a little kid again. Okay, so remember, emotional flashbacks aren't necessarily taking you back into a specific memory. Like, you're not flashing back to a memory as much as you are flashing back to an emotional state you experienced as a child. Okay. And this moment, the pain that comes up with that emotional flashback, it can come on very suddenly without warning. For sure, this is how I experience it. It can be triggered by like a comment or a look or somebody walking away from me even, or just, making a face at me. And of course, many of you, as I'm saying this, I'm sure you may be thinking of like, yeah, this is the hyper empathic ability most of us develop when we're raised in childhoods where it's not that safe, where you have to be like hyper attuned and aware of everything your caregivers are doing their emotional states, how they're looking, how they're sounding, what's the tone in their voice. Therefore, as an adult, right, I'm doing this without even knowing. Something triggers me without warning. That pain comes on super suddenly. And it ends up leaving me feeling very overwhelmed. Like I end up going into shame, despair, or self loathing. And what I want you guys to understand, which was like so big for me yesterday, was understanding that what is happening in that moment is my nervous system is reacting to an old, unresolved wound as if it's happening all over again. I really want to normalize for so many of you the intensity of triggers in your life, because holy shit, if you don't understand that that's what's happening, you can be going through life like I have been this last week, because I really didn't understand to this level what was going on, feeling so much shame at the emotional tidal waves that hit you. And what is wrong with me? Why is this such a big deal? Why can't I let this go? For me, a lot of the dialogue this last week was because I'm having these interactions with my son, just so much shame that I can't be more grounded, that I'm not more adult, that I can't be more calm and patient, that I let things get to me, that I hold myself to the standard of, well, I'm sure other adults, other parents are able to not feel that way. Other parents are able to just let that kind of slide off their back. And a lot of comparison, right, to my ex-husband, and that compounding inside me, right? I want to, in saying, I want to normalize the intensity of these triggers, I really want to help you guys understand that the reason these moments are so overwhelming, something as small as, for example, my son last night, at one point we're talking and he's not liking what I'm hearing, but I'm like really trying to explain myself, really trying to connect with him. And right at the end of it, I'm like, hey, can I give you a hug? And he says no, and like puts his hands up like, no, don't touch me. That moment, y'all, it was instantaneous. The emotional pain, just the wall of pain that just hit me. And why that is, and why that is so overwhelming, that emotional moment, is because as kids, the abandonment that we face when a parent does that is actually a literal threat to our survival, right? Our brain has been trained, if this person doesn't love me, if this person isn't happy with me, I'm going to possibly not get fed or not get things that I need. For me, it's not that I didn't get fed, but like I really needed a lot more emotional connection and support than I was receiving. Especially, my brain is just so overactive. I'm definitely neurodivergent in some really beautiful ways that I think were really difficult for my mother. And she did not have the tools to help me feel safe in my own body and my own emotional experiences. So that was a huge, actual, real threat to my survival, was feeling abandonment from a support, somebody to help me feel safe in my body. And so because of that, now when something like my son saying, I'm asking for a hug, and he says, no, don't, that reads in my body like rejection. And it can feel just as dangerous to my heart and my mind as it did in childhood, even if I understand, like, a conscious level, that it's not life-threatening anymore. And that is what's so confusing about this dynamic. And that's what really spirals you out into that shame, is because you're like, what the fuck? I'm the adult. It's okay for people not to want hugs. I'm proud of him for having a boundary, and he didn't want a hug, and so he said he didn't want to. But that still doesn't address what's going on in me. And that's where I typically then slide into this depression abandonment cycle. So one of the key pieces I want you guys to understand is that when the profound pain of a childhood wound is being activated by a trigger, it will make the current experience feel so much bigger than that present moment. And that does not mean you are somehow crazy, right? I think as most women, we think, why the fuck did I react like that? There must be something wrong with me. It means that there are deep childhood wounds inside of you that need attention. And as I'm going to explain later from Pete Walker, right? Like that is the key, is moving into compassion for ourselves instead of what I'll explain, which is what I move into, which is that shame spiral. What the fuck is wrong with me? And also, just like an even bigger perspective for all of this is seeing that, yesterday I was stuck in a lot of feeling like I just want this all to go away. I can't do this. I'm not a good enough mom. I need to do something else, right? Because it just feels so heavy and so big. But there was also this little thread calling to me, which was this acknowledgement that I could feel of this rejection or criticism, this current perfect storm that me and my oldest are in at the moment, in many ways is a key for me. Like it is unlocking the door to these old wounds. And of course, that's why it hurts so much, because those wounds are being opened. But that the goal isn't necessarily at this point in my life, because I have created enough of a supportive environment. I have gotten my head enough above water. The goal may not necessarily be to get away as much as to get more support to process the amount of pain that's being unlocked by this. I want to dive now in, because I think it's going to help most of all to kind of break down the event so that you guys can see the different little moments. I think the heart of this, and this is why understanding yourself through a lens of connection with other people, like what they're doing in their own lives and how that's brushing up against you. That's why that in the title I was talking about both depression and connection. It's so helpful to see both sides of this experience with me and my son, in that, my son just turned 14 this summer. He is a very, I would say, very smart, confident, funny, social human that in many ways has stepped up and become very independent over the last years of his life. And I feel like what that's led to is, now that he's 14, he's individuating, which is a healthy process that happens in teenagehood, of realizing you get to have your own opinions, you get to be your own person, you can do things your own way. And what I feel like is happening a little bit with him and me is, because he's already so independent and confident, him individuating is happening at a much faster rate. It feels like there's just been this like pedal to the metal acceleration since this summer of him really branching out into like, I know what's best for me. I can trust myself and I don't really need your help, and I'm going to do it my way. Now, where that is brushing up against my pain, right, is that in childhood, so much of my core wound in childhood is around not feeling good enough, around not having answers, around being rejected or criticized or not doing it right. And as you guys know, I've been very open about this on the podcast. Parenting happens to be one of the toughest areas for me, around feeling confident, around feeling like I know what I'm doing. It does not come with an instruction manual. And having been raised with a mother who had a very strong narcissistic personality, a very strong, I know what to do, you need to follow me, you're not doing it right, do it this way. That's like my core wound, right? Is around not feeling like I know the right thing and having a lot of pain when I am criticized for not knowing that. And then also like the love withdrawal, right? When I wouldn't do what my mom wanted, there would be a lot of love withdrawal. Y'all, do you see how this is like just the perfect storm for me and my oldest of the very thing teenagers do most of the time is, right, this love withdrawal, this like they want to get what they want to get. In fact, I was thinking, just yesterday I was speaking with a therapist I had scheduled a session with, who's worked extensively with like me, my oldest, and my ex-husband around this issue. And I was calling her just to have a session for myself. And she's like, look, this is what teenagers do. Teenagers are manipulative. And I'm not saying that in a mean way. It just is what it is. They want what they want and they're going to do whatever they have to do to get it. Even if that means emotionally manipulating you and triangulating you with the other parent and like all of that, which for me, y'all, is a serious shitstorm of triggers. It's triggers from my marriage, it's triggers from my childhood, just kind of all coming to the forefront right now in this connection with my oldest. And we've really been experiencing this, like I said, since the summer. So it's been over 6 months now of just trying to find our way through this new dynamic. And in a lot of ways, y'all, me getting pretty wrecked on the depression, on the feelings of being completely dragged right back down into that hopeless helplessness of childhood from these interactions. So yesterday, I'm in the thick of this, right? I would say that the majority of the interactions right now with my son are absolutely focused around his phone usage. And the pain points would be me feeling as a parent, my responsibility to have boundaries and to have certain limits in place. And his goal is to, have his phone the most that he can and feeling like I should trust him and he should be able to use it as much as he wants to. And so yesterday, what happened was we recently had an interaction where I decided, okay, I need to, for myself, have boundaries that are scaled back around the phone usage, just clearer boundaries. And so he'd come back from his dad's. I was communicating that to all of them. And of course, what is going to happen, but frustration on his part, criticism, moments of rejection, moments of expressing frustration that start compounding for me, and I'm trying to manage the feelings in my body, but it's just like trigger after trigger after trigger that I'm, much as I can, trying to step away, going and calming down in my room, or, even communicating with him like, hey, I'm starting to feel overwhelmed. I'm going to walk away. I was needing to, download an app on his phone that's going to help with shutting down screen time. So this is the first piece of the abandonment depression cycle. I'm going to break it down for y'all. The first piece, though, is this triggering event. And for me, in this instance, there were like multiple triggers happening. It's where something in your present moment is sparking those old feelings, right? Which those old feelings, that would be that emotional flashback piece. But in this instance, I'm not just having one trigger, it's multiple and they're compounding. So as the day's going on, as they're compounding, I'm having to come in, keep working on the phone. He's, of course, sitting like wanting to have his phone back. The download for the phone is taking too long. He's upset about that. I am steadily starting to now like emotional flood. And that's when I start feeling overwhelmed by the despair, by the hopelessness, by the shame. And it'll start out kind of just on the edges. And then that'll get like mixed in with this next step of the inner critic starting to speak, where it's like, why is this so hard? You should be able to do this. And that really starts the shame spiraling. Can you see how we're kind of just throwing it all in the pot? Now we're getting the soup really going. I'm vacillating between moments of feeling the pain of the comment he just made down into like, okay, it's fine. It's fine. You got this. You got this. Just breathe, get into your body. Okay. And then like another wave will hit me, or the critic will jump in and be like, oh my God, look at you. You can't handle this. You're overwhelmed already. All of this is happening until, and I'm trying to step away and manage it until the moment where it kind of reaches a head, which was last night when I already, so just little other peek into me is I have a lot of, I would say, childhood trauma around dinners, around food. I feel a lot of pressure in my own daily life around feeding my kids. I struggle at times feeding myself. Like that is one of my coping ways, is to just not eat from the stress. So already I've got a lot of stuff in the mix around food, but nights where I can just put out leftovers are just such a relief because it's like there's good food already made. So I'd put out a bunch of leftovers and I felt personally like, man, these are really good ones. There was steak, there was chicken thighs. I put them out. And of course, in his teenage way, he's like, I don't want to eat these. And I'm like, yes, I understand, but this is what's for dinner. Well, can I get DoorDash? Y'all, even something just as simple right there as asking, can I get DoorDash? That is a trigger for me because there's this pushing back on my choice, right? And as a people pleasing, recovering codependent, where saying no to a narcissistic mother meant like emotional death, having to say no again to my child is like, oh. So I say no again. And I emphasize like, look, I want you to eat something healthy. You know, you getting dinner that's different from your siblings. We're just not going to start doing that where you just get to buy food just because you want to, right? These are all healthy boundaries for a parent to have with a child. But y'all, I cannot convey fully how intense this is for my body and my nervous system while I'm trying to do this, while I'm trying to stay firm on this boundary that this person in my life doesn't like. So I established once again, hey, you can have one night where you're eating leftovers, okay? And then I have to go away to my room because I can feel it. I'm starting to flood. I'm starting to spiral. At that point, the pain just came. I needed to go cry. I curled up in my closet because, and I want to also provide the framework of like, this has been something we've been struggling with for a while now, right? This exact dynamic. And I painted it for you guys earlier of like, he's individuating, pushing back on a lot of stuff. And it is just really tough for me because it triggers so much. So I'm in my room crying, finally get myself like, okay, we're all right. I come back out into the kitchen and he is there making pancakes. And I went from, as re-regulated as I could possibly be in that moment, which probably was not that much even, to like, boom, there's that trigger again. The trigger of like, even when I tell somebody what I need or explain what I need them to do, or I set a boundary, they will just do what they're going to do. Right? Oh my God, y'all. So by this point, this is the fourth step in this abandonment cycle, right? We've got the triggers, then we get into emotional flooding, then we mix in the inner critic and the shame spiraling. The final piece though is when we end up in like our 4 Fs, which are the fight, the flight, the freeze, and the fawn. And I would offer, even though I'm saying that's where we end up, you're cycling in and out of all of these kind of at the same time, because you'll see. So what happens is I walk in, boom, I have another trigger. I feel all of this rush of the cycle, lots of like shame, hopelessness, the critics coming in. Now, though, there's also the mix of my fight response coming online, which is no, I am the adult. I get to have boundaries. This isn't okay. You need to understand. Where also previously, I think I was doing a little bit more of the flight response, right? Where I'm like, I need to leave. I need to walk away. And I'll even notice I do all of the other ones as well. Sometimes I definitely go into the freeze mode where I just get paralyzed and I just loop and loop and loop in my head. And then also the fawning, which is where I'll come back and I'll try to be like, here, this is why. Let me explain it. Let me make you feel better because I don't want to leave you feeling upset. I need us to feel good before I can walk away. Okay. So all of that can come in and be a part of what's happening. In this instance, though, I kind of went more into a fight response, which was to eventually be like standing there and just have to be like, look, oh my God, I'm really frustrated right now that you went and made pancakes. I was planning on making pancakes in the morning for all of us. This is good. I don't feel like pancakes are the best thing for your body. This is good food here, steak and thighs. This is what a growing boy needs because I have so much shame, my own trauma, shame around my mother not actually feeding us food that was good for us. She definitely was dealing with her own depression at many times. And I was left to figure out food for my siblings or just eat whatever we had. So that's all culminating in this moment, right? And I can see he's starting to spiral now into his own shame because he's realizing more of the extent of what's going on here. And he's like, well, I'll throw away the pancake mix then. And I'm like, no, just at this point, it's okay. I just need you to understand that there's a lot more going on here than you may understand, and that I really need your help listening when I tell you what I need. And tonight I just needed us to all eat the leftovers. So it sounds like we're finding a place where we're on equal footing. But no, y'all, by that point, I get that out and then I just have to leave again. And I go to my room and the deluge comes in. Just some of the most painful feelings that I really just can't describe. I'm hoping that a lot of you that are maybe experiencing this in your life will feel seen in this moment, or that maybe in the next month or so, when you do have one of these, when you're in the same moment, you'll be like, oh my God, that's right. This is what's happening. Because thankfully, because I had read the chapter 12 abandonment depression cycle piece earlier that day, I had just enough awareness to be like, oh my God, this is what's happening. Here it is right here. And I knew that these feelings that were coming up were going to be glimpses of the depth of the pain that is deep down inside me, of that abandonment depression. And because of that, with some of the tools that I'm going to talk about later, I was able, for brief moments, y'all, I mean, I was really, really wrecked last night. It was a lot of pain to process, a lot of confusion, a lot of just really aggressive inner critic attacking me, and so much shame, despair, and hopelessness. But I did have probably about 3 or 4 moments where I feel like I was able to just stay with the sensation that was arising in my body. And in that moment of mindfully interacting with that pain, I was able to start grieving and making contact with that part of me, those parts of me really, that in childhood were feeling this level of pain and had no support whatsoever. And in opening that door and letting that pain finally come through in a space where I'm just being with it. And that sounds so much prettier than what it looks like, y'all. I was just like, holy fuck, on my knees in my closet, fetal position, just crying out this sadness of the abandonment, of feeling so utterly helpless and alone, and realizing, oh, this is how I felt for most of my life. And also seeing the complexity, like at one point, one of those deep core moments where I was like really grieving was the like, wow, realizing just how overwhelmed and alone I felt as a child. Another part of that abandonment depression cycle that I saw emerge later was a lot of isolating from Joe. Joe was there during all of it. And, the way I parent, Joe is not involved in parenting my kids, or I don't want to say my head is saying like contrary to what you see in a lot of movies, or with like, a partner that steps in and is parenting. For me, that's just really not a fit. And so Joe has really respected that space. Like, I parent my kids, but he was there in the space. And especially as I was coming back out, and I just couldn't even look at him. I couldn't even make eye contact because I just felt so much shame around not being able to manage myself. And I felt myself isolating and pulling away. And heads up, I've noticed that this last week, right? Because I told you guys I've been in this abandonment depression cycle off and on this week as well. And I tend to isolate in it because it feels so vulnerable to be seen in this state of just frantic emotional flooding, shame spiraling, inner critic, freezing, fawning, all the things. So I noticed that other element of kind of isolating from him, not even being able to make eye contact with him really. And then even towards the end of this whole cycle, really fascinating, I noticed myself starting to get angry with him, with these feelings of like, why didn't you come find me? Why didn't you come help me? And I knew enough from that chapter 12 to realize, oh, this is also part of that abandonment depression cycle where sometimes it feels safer to, instead of staying with the feelings, to start projecting and externalizing them out onto my partner, which in this instance, I know that that's what that was. And that deep down, because I have chosen a partner that I know is aligned with my values and priorities, that understands my CPTSD and loves me, that wasn't actually a real indicator of, oh, this isn't somebody I want to be with, as much as it was, wow, I'm really hurting. And I'm hurting enough that my psyche is like wanting to attack someone that actually really does love me and has my back. And I'm clarifying that specifically for all of y'all, because that is very different than when you actually have a partner who can't support you in those ways. So I just want to catch all y'all's brains, because you're going to probably see this exact interaction in your marriages as well. Like, for sure, this is 100% what was going on in my previous marriage, big time. I would caveat it though by saying one of the biggest differences though is that because of the lack of education, healing that both me and my ex-husband had at that time, he was not a safe person to actually go and be supported by, because in a lot of ways he would, when his own trauma was triggered, he would do those same things, the criticism or the rejection or the in his own little ways, and that would just spiral me even further. My current partner, Joe, does not do that. That is not something he has ever done with me. And even though I knew that last night, a part of me knew that, a part of me wanted to reach out to him. And this was like one of those other, like when I mentioned those 4 deep moments where I touched my pain, like right up against it. This was one of them, which was this feeling. I remember sitting at the table and I felt this rush of wanting him to come over and hug me. And at the same time, hating myself so much for wanting that connection. And that 100% comes from the trauma of my childhood and the interactions that I had with my parents, right? Wanting so badly to be close to people who, in the case of my narcissistic mother, would emotionally and mentally abuse me. And then in the case of my father, sexually abused me. So that moment when I felt that, I was like, oh yeah, there it is. It was such a waking up for me to an even deeper level of acknowledging. Yes, I acknowledged this last year that I have CPTSD, and that was huge, has improved my life so much. But this was waking up even more to, oh wow, there is this deep abandonment depression that is here, that hasn't just magically gone away because I got divorced or because I acknowledged I have CPTSD. This is something that I lived with for all of my formative years as a child. This is something I had to deal with alone all through my teenage years. And then ultimately, when I went to college and then I got married, this was still always there in the background with no support, no understanding, just kind of compounding inside of me. One other piece that I really want to spend some time, we're not even close to being done. That almost makes it sound like this episode's over. But I want to segue a little bit. Now that I've kind of given you guys the cycle, I hope I've illustrated what it feels like, what it looks like to be going through it. And I am going to talk with you about his tools to help you when you're in this. But something else that just really landed for me coming out of that chapter 12 that Pete Walker discussed was really reframing depression. And in the way he put it, he was like, look, depression is normal. And he even calls out and says it's so disappointing that in our culture and our society, we have really stigmatized depression. We have made it seem like an anomaly or something that's going wrong with you. But ultimately, depression isn't a sign of failure or weakness. It is just that natural response to the pain of abandonment, neglect, and unmet needs. And he says it's not pathological to feel depressed when we are processing old pain. that it is actually a necessary part of the grief. And I loved this reframe for me because I don't know about y'all, but I definitely still have stigma and feel shame around even saying aloud to myself that I feel depression, that this last week I have been deeply in the throes of depression. That's what it is. Now that I look back over this past week, I actually had a trigger between me, my oldest, and my ex-husband trying to figure out this parenting thing on Tuesday of this week that really kicked off and started all of this. And that has led to this cycle that I've been in this whole week. And to normalize that, to help it when he says it's not pathological to feel depressed. And now that I've provided this framework too for y'all to understand the root of this, then it becomes well, yeah, duh, right? Of course, I was feeling and experiencing a lot of depression this week. And quick heads up, doesn't mean I'm out of it now either. This episode may sound a little bit like now I know and now I'm not depressed anymore, but I can feel the depression residing in my body right now. You can probably hear it in my voice. You could hear it when I started the episode. It's with me right now. It's still here. And using depression when we can see it as a indicator light, as something calling for our attention, then being able to react and come to it with more of a compassionate stance. And most of all, I just felt so much comfort in him saying it doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It shows that what's happening is your mind and your body are working to process old wounds. Because you guys, and this has come through so much over this last year, that you cannot heal what you don't feel. Biggest takeaway for me from 2024 was the realization that if I want to heal these traumas, these wounds, the only way to do that is for them to get re-triggered and felt again. Whoa, y'all, right? My relationship with Joe was such a testament to that. I know I had an episode that I gave you guys where I was heads up, here I am experiencing the relationship I've always dreamed of, and fuck, is it triggering? Fuck, did I not expect for it to be this hard? Definitely a part of me still believed in the fairy tale Disney happily ever after. You're going to meet your prince. And once you find that person, it's going to be amazing. And what I learned was there's still going to be triggers. I'm still going to have old pain coming up and processing. But the difference now is I am healing with this partner, right? With Joe, I have a partner who's secure enough that I can actually heal, that I don't. A good example of the contrast would be that with my son, he does not have the tools, he's not a secure attachment, and I am not currently a secure enough attachment in a lot of ways for what we're dealing with, the level we're dealing with right now of his individuation. And so that leads to the two of us just triggering the fuck out of each other until I would offer, I'm sure he's also kind of going into his own abandonment depression, just like I am. And even admitting that, y'all, I just want to stop for a second and acknowledge my bravery in admitting and seeing the trauma that's being created right now, right? That I think we're all so afraid of, that I'm learning to just be more compassionate all around with, because I didn't pick to be treated the way I was in childhood. I am doing everything I can to support and be there and heal that for myself now. And the reality is it's a really fucking messy process. And I think maybe it just comes down to feeling gratitude for the people who go through that with us, right? And especially that's a huge piece of that is if you have children, that's going to be your children. Because as much as I want to never traumatize them and to, give them this childhood of secure attachment, I also have to be honest with myself about what I'm actually working with. And boy, was last night, a big moment of that, of having to acknowledge, like, oh my God, I'm still dealing with just so much pain from my own childhood while simultaneously trying to be a secure attachment for a child that is individuating and is in teenagehood. And I want to acknowledge too, this is something that Pete Walker says in the book, where he talks about being a good enough parent. And I won't go into that right now because that's a whole other section, but that's really where I'm landing, is understanding, in trying to be honest and trying to be open, in getting support, right? In speaking with that therapist yesterday, in this, in recording a podcast, speaking about all of this, processing all of this, in reading and getting tools, coming back and landing at the place of, yes, because of the severity of the trauma I experienced in childhood, the path to healing for me that I am having to do simultaneously with being a parent myself means there are triggers and trauma happening right now in the relationship with me and my kids, and still acknowledging, which Quinn and Joe help me do so often, that in many ways I am still absolutely a powerful and wonderful, good enough parent. And in a lot of key ways, I am doing things very, very different than the way I was raised. Right? Acknowledging, helping my children understand what I'm working with, communicating that clearly. I will say one of the gifts that I've had and appreciated deeply with my ex-husband now is that I have communicated, and there is a lot of awareness for him around my trauma now, around what it's like for me parenting, and a lot of support for him. I was even able to call him last night because he knows, based off of the triggering Tuesday, kind of the direction I'm going to take. We're going to do kind of different styles of parenting around the phone at our home. So more of like a parallel kind of approach, which is not what we'd been doing previously, but what we were doing previously was creating a lot of triangulation. So moving into this more parallel approach, and me just explaining, like, this is what I need for my mental health. This is what I need for me to feel safe in my home, and to just help me manage the load of everything I'm dealing with the variable of me having CPTSD. And so calling him last night, he was very supportive and understands more, because I have been open about it, what it's actually like over here. Being a parent, I don't have any parents that I can rely on. He also has his parents living nearby. And that is truly a gift. Obviously, that's not something that everybody gets to have, but I just want to acknowledge and feel proud that that is a way that I am being a good enough parent, right? And even acknowledging, as I did this week, that, there may need to be a different scenario for this time. There may need to be more support of my son potentially living more over there than he is here, right? Being open. When we start actually being honest about what we're experiencing, which is so hard. I just want to acknowledge that. It has been hard for me this week to be honest about, I am struggling. This is a lot. Trying to run my own business, trying to raise 3 boys, trying to grow up on as well. Like, I'm as you know, I'm individuating right now too. I'm still figuring out like who I am, what I love, what I think about the world while raising a teenager and having these patterns from childhood of needing to be perfect, to be safe, needing to have everything together, needing to look like I have all the answers. It has been a lot this last week to open and be honest and asking for help and receiving that help, right? I think I'm doing a pretty good job of painting for y'all this process and what it's looked like. Coming back to the piece about depression, why having Pete Walker normalize that was so helpful for me is because it was not safe to feel depression in my home of origin. And he talks about this, that in a family where it's not safe to feel depression, you risk, by showing emotion that is not in the prescribed box that your parents need you to stay in, you risk that rejection and that criticism. And so, ergo, you develop this internal critic that rejects and criticizes you ahead of time as soon as you start feeling depression, right? And you get into this like, oh no, not that again, anything but that. I definitely a couple days this week was just cycling through what he describes as, I think he was saying when we want to avoid this pain, the abandonment depression, we'll move into either these, I think it was like left brain over busying, overworking, just like go, 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 like hyper cleaning, hyper fixing, caretaking everybody else to avoid the pain. Or the opposite is like the right brain kind of disassociating, using substances, like for me, scrolling. Oh my God, scrolling on Instagram. That's a big way that my brain is like, I do not want to feel the sadness. Let's go there. Or sleeping. I'll get really tired when I'm not wanting, when I'm dealing with depression. It's like, I just need to sleep to escape. And being able to see those, like having him describe them and what's happening was like, oh, okay. Of course, that's where we go when we don't have the tools, when we, one, don't even understand the cycle we're in. And we have so much shame around the depression, we're just going to go straight into these coping mechanisms. But with the awareness now of what's happening, I was able last night, in the little ways that I was, like I said, guys, it was really just a fucking roller coaster. I was just like in for the ride. And there was a lot of crying. But having these tools that I'm going to now take you through can really help for just even starting to learn how to navigate this cycle. So in the chapter, he recommended these 4 tools, and I'll hopefully be able to share a couple, like give you guys some examples of how I used them. So the first one that he has is that self-compassion. Okay. And he says that this is the first and most important tool. And he recommends speaking to yourself like you would a scared or hurting child. And y'all, this is really, really difficult for me to do. My inner critic is very strong. My shame and hopeless helplessness was like full bore. But there was this moment I can remember. I was in the fetal position in my closet, just at like the depth of overwhelm, which is just, that's also like a core abandonment depression wound piece for me, that is so rooted in my childhood of just like no way out. I feel completely trapped. And in that moment, I just said to myself out loud, I've got you. I'm not going to leave you. And damn, did I feel in that moment. So it's like I shifted in that moment in saying those just simple words, I've got you. I'm not going to leave you. I felt the shift from the abandonment depression into the grief. And when the grief hit, I just poured it out. I just screamed and cried and let myself feel that pain in childhood of feeling like I did not have someone that would come and say, I've got you. I'm not going to leave you. Right? So, although self-compassion is difficult for me, that is an incredible tool that I am learning to utilize, of speaking kindly to myself, of speaking kindly to these parts that are afraid, and just reminding myself, I'm not going to leave you. Sometimes that's all I can say, right? It's like I don't even have answers or how we're going to do it or what we're going to do. It's just, it's okay to feel this way. I'm not going to leave you. Now, the second piece was connection. That's another tool that he recommends, which is reaching out to someone you trust. And I thought it was fascinating watching myself last night. I really struggled with this. I definitely had a moment where I started going through all the names of people that I would reach out to. And at the time, my self-shame that I couldn't handle this on my own was so great that I couldn't bring myself to do it. As I told you guys, I couldn't even look Joe in the eyes. I thought about calling Quinn, but I just had already felt, and my brain made up all the excuses. I've already taken too much of her time today. I felt this deep longing to be held by someone. I thought through a friend of mine that lives up the road that I'm close with and was like, nope, she's going to be busy. I don't want to bother her. All the thoughts, right? I felt so, I don't know if the word was terrified to ask for help. It just is like everybody I could think of, the door just kept shutting. And so I did what I could do, right? Which for me was giving myself the space away from everybody else where I could feel safe to feel. And then I would reemerge and I'd be in the kitchen just doing something that could kind of ground me into the moment, which he talks about this. Like, you can feel the emotions and then maybe you need to go do a little bit of an action that like helps soothe you. For me, it was cleaning the kitchen. Just feeling like, see, I can do something. I can box up this food. I can put this food in the fridge. And then I would get overwhelmed and be in the kitchen and maybe something else would happen or another trigger and I would just step away and I would go back into my room and I would just go let all of that be felt again until I could kind of restabilize. And then what I noticed is by the end of the night, though, and this is what I'm really grateful for, and Joe had given me a lot of space. He was not coming up and fixing it for me. And looking back, that was hard, but also I really feel like that was really meant to be, because I went through a lot more processing in my own journey in what he knows is a safe container, right? In that, like, he's there, he's still in the room with me. But at the end of the evening, I was sitting at the table, and as you guys know, part of me was like not wanting to talk or really look at him because I was also experiencing a wave of anger being directed towards him. Which honestly, if I think about it now, I'm sure Pete Walker would be like, yes, that is the healthy anger that you should be expressing to your parents in your mind, in your body, right? Being able to say, like, you weren't there for me. You didn't hold me. You didn't help me. You really abandoned me. I had to feel all of this on my own. But he did take a moment. He just, without words, came and he came up behind me and he just put his arms around me. And honestly, at that moment, it was still a little bit too triggering to feel any kind of release, but it signaled his love for me, just that he was there and he didn't even say much. And from there, we were sitting at the kitchen table together. I was eating. I just found myself gradually being able, after he'd hugged me, to make a little bit more eye contact. We started, he started conversations about something that was silly or something just kind of neutral. And it just steadily kind of got me back out, a little bit more present. And then especially how he handled it when we finally made it to bed that night after I got the boys down. My son and I had a really great connecting moment at one point where I came in and just explained, this is my CPTSD. When you say these certain things, I don't just hear what you're saying. I hear like rejection, because as a child, I needed to be perfect. And so I explained all that to him. We had this really great connecting moment. And then I had to finish up some stuff on his phone and he got re-triggered again and I got re-triggered again. It was just like, okay, real life, right? Real life. So closed that out as best as I could, basically went to bed again, like re-triggered, not as extreme as I'd been previously, but still re-triggered. And as we climb into bed, just this is the connection piece of Joe pulling me to him, of me starting to be able to speak aloud what I'd actually been going through, what was happening, crying again, and him just holding me. And that really, I have to say, I think is probably why I'm waking up a little bit more grounded and okay today, because having at least that one secure attachment in my life, which I would offer, that's being dramatic, right? I know Quinn is a secure attachment, but man, is it such a gift that I have given myself by doing the journey, by taking the journey that I had to take to end up meeting someone that is a secure attachment and that can now be in my life a real source of connection and support in moments like this, which was that, I got to be held. He reflected back a lot of those, I see you, I love you. Yes, I know what this is like. As I'm explaining, like, this abandonment depression. One of the things I love the most about Joe is that he really does understand this level of trauma from his own life and how overwhelming and terrifying and painful it can be. And so there's no get over it, or you should be okay, or what's going on with you, or why can't, right? All the things that I think previous partners who just didn't understand this would do, he doesn't do. So that's that connection piece, right? I wanted to acknowledge I really avoided it for a lot last night. I did not use that tool because I have I told you guys, that core wound of like simultaneously wanting to depend on someone and also hating myself for it because of the abuse. But that's what I'm retraining, right? That's what I am, with the help of people who can support and love me, retraining. Now, the third tool, and this was the one I probably used the most last night, was this technique he calls mindfulness. And ultimately, the way I think of it, when he talks about mindfulness, it's really grounding into the current sensation, like just being with the pain in the body, being with the fear in the body. So when you are, the way he describes it is that when we're like brushing up against that wound, typically that's when all of our childhood coping mechanisms pop in, right? That's the escaping, that's the shaming, that's the despairing, that's the inner critic talking, that's the fawning, the fighting, the freezing. And it's all in an attempt to avoid this feeling that in childhood we thought, if I feel this, I will die. And I'm not going to lie, even now, when I do manage to touch and tap into these feelings, when they first come up, I'm like, holy shit, I'm going to die. This is death. It is so intense. But this is the like crazy magic paradoxical piece, is that when you stay with that feeling with mindfulness, which is the technique I've often talked about in the podcast of when I'm talking about processing emotions, there's the pain. Where do I feel it? It feels like this, gaping hole in my stomach. It feels like this black expanse in my chest. It feels like this constriction and squeezing in my throat. And to be honest, guys, I was so triggered last night that I couldn't even do that much. But what I could do was just breathe and be with the pain. And honestly, I probably was only fully in those like 4 incidences where I was like really fully looking that dragon right in the face, right? Like right up against it. I maybe was fully present in this mindful way a total of like 15, 20 seconds out of those 4 different incidents. But what a difference that made. I can feel today that even though I'm still, right, there's still the depression's still here. I can feel it. There's still so much pain inside of me that wants to be seen and acknowledged. Those little girl parts that just went through so much as a kid. But even just those 20 seconds of being with that full sensation, I can feel has made a difference in my body. It has, and I don't even have words for it, but I just know that is the way. And he describes it. He says, the way through the abandonment depression isn't fighting it. You can spend your whole life fighting it. That's what most people do, right? Do you now see, like, it's becoming so clear to me. I'm like, this abandonment depression cycle is what most of us are living every single day in our adult lives. Prior to finding coaching, prior to getting divorced, that was my life. Abandonment depression cycle all day long, with like little interspersed moments of maybe feeling okay or maybe escaping it for a little bit, but it was always there, always coming back to. And the way through it isn't in fighting it, it's the sitting with it. It's the letting it move through you. And even in chapter 12, I mean, this is so hardcore, and I may even take this on perhaps as one of my explorations for 2025, but Pete Walker talks about how the way he started figuring out how to do this was just sitting with himself for 30 minutes a day, specifically with the intent of feeling the pain, of feeling the fear, not from a space. When I say mindfulness, this is not like I'm going to meditate and become peaceful. This is like, I'm going to allow myself to sit with this abandonment depression inside of myself without trying to make it go away, without trying to fix it. And he'll describe in the chapter that for a lot in the beginning, that's all it was his brain, just the monkey mind trying to escape. But that eventually, gradually, as you get better at being with it, letting it move through you, on the other side of that is realizing, oh my God, it didn't kill me. I'm still here. And that you are ultimately still whole and worthy of love, even when you feel shattered. That is really the heart and soul of why I'm taking so much time on this episode to really dive you guys into this process. Because no matter how much I coach my clients, no matter how much we do the like cognitive stuff and we discuss things and you understand it consciously, if you don't have this piece, if you don't eventually go meet these parts of yourself, it will not have nearly the effect that you are wanting. And maybe that's like one of the most important things I can say of all is that in you guys listening to this podcast and me talking about the life that I live, in the experiences I get to have, this is the other half of that life. And this is the technique that has helped me the most. This is the new level I'm reaching in my life. And I truly do believe this is just another step on my journey, on my path. I always am telling you guys to trust your timing. So I'm really softening into, as much as my brain wants to be like, things are going so badly with my 14-year-old and what's happening and why am I doing it wrong and what's wrong with me? No, actually, what's happening is I'm finally in a safe enough, supported enough place in my life that the universe is letting through this tough but beautiful process of my oldest individuating. It's letting my pain be re-triggered so that I can bring it up to the surface and give those parts of me that were so abandoned the compassionate witnessing and acknowledging of their pain that they never received. And this takes me into the final tool that Pete Walker talks about, which is grieving the losses. And, this is where he says, ultimately, there has to be this mourning of the loss of the love and safety and validation that you just didn't get as a kid. And this can be so confusing, right? Because in so many ways, my childhood on the surface looks great. It's not like I had an alcoholic father who was beating my mother or, right? I mean, a lot of people be like, oh yeah, you have trauma. I had a pretty perfect on the outside looking Mormon family, parents that were married. Hell, a lot of people in our community hoped their sons would marry me and my sisters because we looked that great. I never went hungry. We had enough food. I was in activities. I was popular, all the things, right? You would think, like, surely there weren't that many losses. That was not actually the case for me deep down emotionally. Emotionally, there was a ton of trauma in my childhood. And absolutely, there was abandonment, there was loss, there was lots of fear and confusion, a pervasive feeling of love is conditional, I have to earn it, that I didn't even understand consciously, nor could I have articulated at that time, right? And it kind of just, the word that's coming up is there has to be a reckoning for that. Almost like this karmic balancing that someone has to do. Someone has to grieve those losses. Someone has to mourn what happened. And guess what, y'all? It's not going to be my parents. It's not going to be my kids. It's for me to do that. And it is really painful, but it is what clears the emotional blockages so that we can heal and actually have the connection we most desire. And I really want that. I do. I want to experience real, genuine, I talk about it all the time, right? Soul connected connection with the people I love. And to do that looks a lot like letting the triggers and the depression that comes up through connection, often for me, because The connection I grew up with was so painful. Letting those triggers and that depression lead me into opening the door to my deepest pain, and then letting that pain be felt, working through the really messy. I mean, guys, last night, I would say for me emotionally was like an absolute and utter shit show. I went through that cycle, like different iterations and different varieties of that cycle, probably at least 20 times last night, and different levels and different depths of it. And yet here I am still. And the thought that comes through is like, and I'm still here. It's the sun has risen on a new day, and I find more of myself this morning, contrary to what at times it felt like last night, like I was just being obliterated and I was never going to come back. I find this morning that there is more of myself to be had. And for sure, y'all, this has been, when I say this has been the other half of my journey, this has been the other half of my journey. I'm so delighted that I now have a word, the abandonment depression cycle, to encapsulate what, when I've talked on the podcast about really, really deep, painful work, this is it. This is the feeling of those feelings. And ultimately, I think I was even thinking yesterday, I may end up reaching back out to my therapist that did brain spotting this year and maybe have her help me facilitate and move through this emotion that's definitely coming up around the interactions with my son. And what a gift in many ways too, to realize last night that this is not so much about my son as much as it is me. And I can do that in this instance because I have created an environment where I do have the support, right? I just have to say, and I want to be very clear about this, I have thought many times, as much as my ex-husband is supportive right now and is an incredible co-parent on that side in the ways that he is, I don't know if I would, let me put it this way, if I was going through this experience right now with my 14-year-old and I was still married without, all of the self foundation I've built over the last 5 years, without all of the experiences I've had, holy shit, y'all, this is rough the way it is right now, but I can't even imagine how difficult that would be. And I mean, I did it. I definitely had moments over the last year where I did not have a secure attachment partner to fall asleep with, holding me and helping me re-regulate. And there were many nights where I went through really difficult things with my kids, especially parenting is where I get triggered the most, where it was me holding myself in bed that night and waking up that next morning just feeling like, okay, we're going to make it through another day. And I found other ways to support myself through that, right? I definitely think back to that year where I did brain spotting with my therapist, and thank God, to have somebody who could hold the space for me to feel such horrifically painful pain that doesn't even really have words. So I want to paint for you all this picture that, like, if this is what you are experiencing as well, if you are feeling this way, I want you to know that you are not broken or crazy. You're not. Like, this is very definable and predictable, especially when you look at your childhood. And if you have complex PTSD, this is going to be an aspect of it. And in knowing that, this goes back to the really respecting what you are trying to do in this lifetime, and that in carrying and trying to heal and transmute this pain that is in many ways at times just too big to hold alone, that you don't have to hold it alone. That is something that I have gotten better and better at over the years, right? The connection piece, the asking for help, the clearing the people in my life out that did not have the tools or enough of a secure attachment to really be safe places for me. And through that process, making space for people who did to come in. I'm thinking specifically of when the friendship I'd had with my best friend at the time for like 6 years, who was incredible. Kelly, you guys know her. She helped me immensely and she was a secure attachment for many years. And then we reached a point where just because of some of our own things, it was not a fit anymore. And that was such a painful, painful moment letting that go. I mean, in some ways more painful than the ending of my marriage. But looking now, I see how that opened the space for Quinn to come in. And in a lot of very key ways, Quinn is a more secure attachment friend for me, someone who can really hold space for this. And then, as I was saying earlier, I think also in the making space and acknowledging that at that time, my ex-husband and I he was not someone I could heal with. I knew that whatever I needed, it just was not something he could provide. I understand it better now. In letting that go, I opened up the space for partnerships that all along the way, showed me more and more what I was looking for and have ultimately led me to someone who deeply understands what this cycle is, understands what it's like to live with CPTSD, and can hold that space for me. And so in my life, those are two big areas where I am not holding this pain alone. But I also think big time of you're in the process of considering divorce. So you don't have a secure attachment, romantic partner in the way that I have now. But this is the space for therapy. This is the space for, I even have seen it happening in the community. And I really want to recommend that again to those of you that may be struggling with this and feeling alone. I mean, that's why I'm making this episode, right? Is to say, you're not alone. This is something I experience too. And just because I'm this way does not make me not lovable or worthy of a good life. I think that's one of the deepest pains with the CPTSD and the abandonment depression, right? Is deep down fearing that you are so fucked up that you don't deserve to have a good life, to have, to be loved, to be worthy just the way you are. And what I have seen happening in the community is so many women just supporting each other, just being there, just seeing each other and really connecting on these deeper levels of just the raw vulnerability where there's no pretending and putting on fake masks and trying to act like everything's great. And instead, hey, this is the shit I'm going through right now. And God, what a gift that is when we can be in communities and spaces with others who feel safe enough to not pretend around us and where we don't feel like we have to pretend around them. So I really want to recommend and, just once again say, I'm so grateful to have that space now, to have created that space, and to be able to welcome so many of you that want to be there into it so that you don't have to go through this journey that I've hopefully made a little bit clearer here today, right? By showing you a deeper dive into this 50% of it, not having to do it alone. I mean, God, that's definitely something I feel very passionate about, is making sure that not only are you going through the, process of considering divorce, but you might also be dealing with this aspect, depression, CPTSD, moving in and out of the abandonment depression cycle, and to not have to do that alone, to not have to, when suicidal ideation comes up, when you feel absolutely hopeless and helpless, to know, oh yeah, no, this is this is CPTSD. And actually, I have a bunch of friends in the community that I know are dealing with this too. And I know Britta is dealing with this too. And what it would have meant to me, right, back then, to have had a voice, somebody I admired who was living a life that I wanted, to say, this is what it looks like. This is the raw, real up and down, and it's worth it. And I've got you, and a bunch of other women have got you too. And we're all going to go through this together. Damn, that feels so good. So I just want to close out this episode with, I think I just want to acknowledge a lot of gratitude for the gift that is this podcast, right? It's so symbiotic what we're doing here as I share my journey and my experiences. You guys get to learn from it. You're impacted by it. I mean, this week I had 2 90-minute sessions that were just so amazing. Hello, both of you. I'm obsessed and in love with both of you already. That on both, these women got on and were like, your podcast, it's just like everything. It's what I listen to on repeat. It's kind of like a lifeline was what I felt like they were telling me. And so there's that piece, right, of knowing like how much it's doing for all of you. And then me feeling today how much it does for me to have this space to come to process and to share the things I'm learning, and to feel like this pain I'm going through, the journey I've walked, isn't just for me. It's for so many other women as well. So many other people benefit. And I think when we can put our pain in that kind of a lens, right, understanding the greater impact it has, damn, that makes it feel really worth it. And it adds this energy behind it of like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna keep facing these dragons and ultimately befriending them. And I'm gonna keep cutting my way forward through this wilderness and hopefully making a path that makes it easier for those that come behind, while also feeling so much gratitude, right, for all the people that have gone before me and cut the path, right? I mean, holy shit. Thank you, Pete Walker. This book is changing lives, Pete. If you ever hear this, holy shit, I cannot thank you enough. But yeah, just reframing for all of us that if you are feeling this type of pain, the pain that just feels so overwhelming that I had no framework for previously, it is not because you are weak. Contrary to that, in fact, I believe it's because you are one of the very, very important and special people on the planet that signed up to experience the level of trauma you've experienced in your life, which is unique to each of us, right? I'd never want you guys to compare your trauma to anybody else and think that somehow your trauma isn't enough because it's not as great, air quotes, great as somebody else, but that you signed up to have the particular life that you've had. And contrary to the thoughts that we create in our mind of, I must be the broken one because I can't hack it like everybody else. I can't just be happy in my marriage. I can't just be grateful. I seem to have all of these other issues. That realizing those are actually the gift that you are perhaps called on by the universe to provide by walking the journey of your life, which is this karmic transmutation of the pain that I see so many of us have been given by our childhoods. And that now, by being brave enough to walk a different path, to find a different way, we get to transmute and make different instead of just re-echoing the patterns that I've seen. I see the trauma in my great grandmother, passed to my grandmother, then passed to my mother. And in many of those, that trauma was not getting better. It was just re-traumatizing of each generation. And although, as I said earlier, there's trauma definitely still happening with me and my kids, it's the inevitableness of me trying to heal at the same time as being a parent. I do see, though, how it is not the same as what happened in the generations that came before me. There is so much more awareness. There is so much more of me taking responsibility for what is inside me, what has happened to me, and facing those dragons and befriending them so that I can be a better friend to myself and to my children, because it is that pain inside of us that really affects our connections. And the only way to have more of that connection is by facing that pain. Oof. Yeah, y'all. This episode was the one that was meant to come through. With that said, I just want to convey love for all of you. maybe take some time today to, if this episode resonated with you, if you don't have the Pete Walker book yet and this episode at all resonated, go get it. This has been one of the things that I hear the most from my clients. It was a piece I was really missing before last year that I've seen just huge, huge leaps happening for my clients with. If you already have the book, maybe you are just taking a moment today to journal. Maybe there's some pain that got opened or possibly peeked its head up during the episode. So maybe just writing some of that down to come back to later, reaching out to a trusted friend, or even just in this moment, taking a deep breath and reminding yourself that phrase I kind of said earlier, right? Of like, you're not alone. I'm not going to leave you. I've got you. We've got each other. Isn't that such a beautiful thing to feel, right? Being able to say that to yourself. I've got you. I'm not going to leave you. We've got each other. And then being able to hear it from me saying that to you, right? I see your pain. I see your beauty. We're going to get through this together. And then also I feel it rippling out through the community, right? These women, by their very act of being in that space, their commitment to be there for each other, to make this journey less lonely, and to really help themselves and others remember that we are all so worthy of love and healing. And I feel in this moment that my just awe at what we are creating and rippling and sending out into the world as we do this work all together. So, so grateful. So proud. All right, my loves. Till next week.